The Sandhills are native grasslands that cover 19,600 square miles of wind-deposited sand dunes, comprising of the largest sand dune formation in America. An estimated 85% of the Sandhills is still intact and has never been plowed, helping to minimize the fragmentation of animal habitats. Temperate grasslands on the planet are almost gone. There are 4 places left in the world where there are still large, intact grasslands, and this is one of those few places. It is equal to the Amazon, Himalayas, and the Arctic in the terms of its importance in conservation. The Sandhills are comprised of approximately 1.3 million acres of wetlands formed by groundwater discharge. The sand dunes vary from high, steep hills in the western region to small mounds in the east. The groundwater recharge and discharge associated with the various dune types and the geographic locations influence the type and quality of the wetlands. Wetlands range from shallow, extremely alkaline basins to deeper freshwater lakes to spring-fed streams. Plant communities range from isolated, deciduous, and coniferous forests to extensive, short and tall grass prairies. Plants associated with dry conditions inhabit the top of the sand dunes, while in the valleys, maybe just a few hundred yards away, are lush stands of aquatic plants. It is this wide diversity that provides homes and resting places for the countless numbers of resident and migratory wildlife. This same ecosystem supports a strong ranching economy. The landscape and economics of the Sandhills are connected to the sands and gravels that formed the area over the past 38 million years. Ancient meandering streams deposited hundreds of feet of sands, gravels, and some clays to create the Ogallala Formation. Waters that have been tested 750 feet deep date to several thousands of years old. Wind-blown sand dunes eventually covered these water-saturated deposits. The dunes became stabilized by vegetation. Within the past 100 years, the control of wildfires and managed grazing has reduced the amount of exposed sand. The dunes remain fragile and depend on the grasses to keep the sands in place. Many of the grasses, in turn, are dependent on the groundwater accumulated under the sands. The groundwater, recharged by precipitation, slowly discharges its excess into the lakes, wetlands, meadows, and streams. The waters that flow from the streams in the area are about 90% groundwater, meaning our rivers aren't flowing from a lake or a mountain runoff. Our rivers are flowing from the water coming up from the ground. In the early 1900s, landowners ditched across the wetter meadows and open water marshes to increase grass production. The rapid movement of groundwater creates an underground continuum between the lakes, wetlands, and streams. So an alteration in one area may easily affect vegetation and wetlands over a larger landscape. Thus meaning, now that I've dug a ditch from this large meadow over here to this small meadow, I have altered the land in between enough that now this whole area could possibly become a wetland, maybe causing my larger meadow to become less productive due to the loss of too much water because of that water that's now being fed into the ditched area and the once smaller meadow. Sometimes these small alterations will send water over to a neighboring meadow that you didn't even think about. Another alteration tried in the Sandhills is the conversion of grassland to cropland. 2 attempts, one at the turn of the century with the Kincaid Act, and again in the 1970s, brought financial and environmental problems. In the late 1970s, tax laws, center pivot technology, low land values, and high grain prices encouraged cultivation in the eastern portion of the Sandhills. The Nebraska Natural Resource Commission in 1992 reported that from 1972 to 1981, irrigated land had tripled from 70,550 to 215,000 acres. Crop production dropped as organic material leached or eroded away. Loss of investment tax credits and low profit margins caused many of the fields to become idle. By 1990, irrigation had stopped on 50,000 acres. Much of this was placed in the CRP, or Conservation Reserve Program, which is the conversion back to grasslands. However, this has been difficult and slow. Lands broken 80 years ago have not regained the natural plant diversity or production. The land's brief time as irrigated cropland had a significant impact on the local area. Water tables were lowered in some areas, while other areas experienced flooding. Groundwater contamination by agricultural chemicals began to show up in domestic wells. Wind erosion damaged young corn and covered neighboring pastures. It takes special people to live out here in this delicate ecosystem. Throughout the centuries, people entered and abandoned the Nebraska Sandhills area as the climate fluctuated between long periods of drought and times of plentiful moisture. This consistent movement created a diverse mixture of Indian languages and cultures. The earliest evidence of man in the Sandhills region, including Thomas County, is a Paleo-Indian culture described as the Folsom culture. These people appear to have traveled great distances on foot in search of their favorite prey animal, an extinct species of bison, which was about 25% larger than the modern-day bison. Evidence of this culture has been dated to approximately 10,000 years ago. They did not possess arrow technology. They hunted on foot and left behind a very distinctive type of spear point, giving us what little information we have of their presence. Various other cultures followed the Folsom people into the Sandhills and also left their very distinctive tool types, including the Scottsbluff-Eden Valley Complex, the Angostura Complex, Plainview Complex, and others from the period of 10,000 to about 1,500 years ago. By about 1,500 years ago, the people living in the Sandhills became more like what people visualize when they think of the Plains Indians. Although throughout this time period, there were significant influxes of cultures who relied on a mixture of agriculture and hunting to subsist. The Dismal River culture is just one of these cultures who farmed and hunted and, as the name suggests, were the first identified by the archaeological excavations on the Dismal River. The Pawnees and their northern relatives, the Aricas, lived in the area the longest. They came from the south about 4 or 5 centuries ago and established villages along the Platte, Loup, Republican, and other central Nebraska waterways. The Pawnees hunted buffalo on the plains and farmed beans, corn, and squash. The Indians understood the world to have a unity or coherence that was incomprehensible to the European Americans. Unlike the whites, the Indians made no distinction between practical and religious activities. For example, among the Pawnees, sacred ceremonies were as essential as hoeing is to making corn. Along with the Pawnee were 6 other famous Indian tribes that lived in Nebraska: the Oto, Omaha, Ponca, Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho. Their differences were that they had a different name, language, tradition, and custom. They were alike in so many other ways. They were brownish-red in color, lived mostly outdoors, hunted game, used bows and arrows, spears, wore clubs and knives. They made things from flint, stone, bone, wood, and skins of animals, They learned how to make fire by rubbing sticks together, how to sew, how to tan skins and make robes. Some made pottery, teepees, and earth lodges. In the summer and fall, they ate game, fish, and wild fruit. For winter, they had dried meat and wild fruit. They were fond of music and painting. Music was created by drums they made from hollow logs covered with skins. Rattles were made from gourds or bladders filled with pebbles. Whistles or flutes made of wood or bone. Dances were large parts of their religion. They used colored clay, soft rock, and pencils made from bone to make their paintings, which was done on skins of animals or their own bodies. Indians believed in all kinds of unseen spirits, ghosts, and strange animals. They believed that good and bad spirits brought them good and bad luck. The lightning was an angry god. The thunderbird made the thunder in the sky. The wind talked in a wonderful language. The stars were gods that could help or hinder. Mystery was all about them. They thought that certain charms and certain words drove away the bad spirits and brought the good spirits. The largest Indian nation between the Great Lakes and the Rocky Mountains was the Sioux, consisting of around 50,000. There were 7 main tribes of the Sioux Nation. Plus, there were 7 other tribes that were related to the Sioux in blood and language. At one time, there were from 10,000 to 20,000 Sioux who lived in Nebraska. Most of these belonged to the Oglala and Brule bands. They were proud and brave people. They were great orators, and they lived by the chase. Famous names from the frontier were Red Cloud, Spotted Tail, Crazy Horse, Sitting Bull, American Horse, among many others. Unannounced to the Indians in 1606, the Nebraska region was being claimed by the Spanish, French, and English. The Indians had never even seen the English. They hated the Spanish, but they knew and liked the French. There came a war between the French and English known as the French and Indian War. The French lost. They gave their land east of the Mississippi to England and the land to the west to Spain in 1763. Napoleon bought back from Spain the territory it lost west of the Mississippi. War broke out between England and France before France could settle the area. So as not to lose Louisiana in a surrender to England, Napoleon sold its territory to the United States for $15 million in 1803. This territory transaction is known as the Louisiana Purchase. After the purchase, the Nebraska region was considered part of Indian Territory from October 1, 1804 to July 4th of 1805. After that, it became part of Louisiana until December 7, 1812. From 1812 until 1821, it was Missouri Territory. From 1821 until 1834, there was no government, and the fur traders made trouble by selling whiskey to the Indians, cheating them, and selling their game. Quarrels and wars became frequent. It was during this time that Red Cloud, belonging to the Bad Face band of Oglala tribe, and Spotted Tail, belonging to the Brule tribe, were born. Both of these common warriors became chiefs through superior qualities of mind and body. It was on June 30th, 1834, that the Nebraska region became called Indian Territory. The laws became strict. White men were forbidden to hunt, trap, or settle without permission from the government. It became a crime to take liquor to the region. The United States, England, Spain, and Russia were then claiming this area. England had already set up forts in the Rocky Mountains to trade fur with the Indians. They tried to keep the American settlers out of the area. This again made for dangers of war between England and the United States. There were a few American settlers already settled in Oregon by this time, and to help those that wanted to settle westward, a plan was made in Washington to get them there safely. This was when Lieutenant Fremont explored the Nebraska region. He found the Platte River Valley to be an ideal route. Further plans were made to have settlers along the route to raise crops to feed the immigrants and soldiers. In 1844, after exploring the area and finding the Platte River Valley, Lieutenant Fremont suggested using an Odo word to describe this area. Nebraska is derived from Nebraska, an Odo translation meaning flat water. In 1844, introduced to Congress, was the first bill to seek Nebraska as its own territory. Hot topics slowing down the pursuit of Nebraska becoming a territory was of the pushing the Indians from the area, but in which direction, and how the railroad was going to progress westward due to the issues over where the Indians would be pushed, plus with how slavery was going to shape the area. It wasn't until 4 bills later that the Nebraska-Kansas bill finally proved worthy. For months, nothing else was discussed. The main topic was whether or not this area would be free or a slave state. In May of 1854, it was finally decided that it would be a free territory and broke Kansas into its state, and at that time, Nebraska was 5 times larger than it is today, including the Dakotas and areas of Wyoming and Montana. During these uncertain times of the Nebraska region becoming a territory, it was just as uncertain with how well the Indians and the white man were getting along. From the earliest explorations of explorers till the treaty at Fort Laramie in 1851, the Oglala and Brule Sioux were at peace with the white people, but were at war with nearly all the other Indian tribes around them. They were driving out the other Indian tribes of the area. Red Cloud and Spotted Tail became leaders at this time for their daringness and good luck, which good luck counts for much more in an Indian camp. Around 1850 is when the westward march over the Oregon Trail, aka the Great Road, began to make the Indian chiefs anxious with concerns. At first, there was only occasional trains. When gold was discovered, the trail was crowded with thousands of wagons filled with men, women, and children. The people shot the buffalo and other game without asking permission. Obviously, there would be no food left if this continued, so a treaty was made with the Oglala, Brule, and other Plains tribes to let each tribe keep the land occupied by it. All the tribes agreed to the division. The U.S. government agreed to pay the Indians $50,000 in goods each year for 50 years for the use of the Great Road through their country, and the Indians agreed not to rob or attack the white people upon this road. The white people were not to go into Indian country without permission from the Indians. When the Senate received the treaty, they changed the time from 50 years down to 10 years. The Indians never agreed to the change. The first few years, the prairie schooners that traveled the Great Road had safe passages. Every spring, the long immigrant wagon trains left the Missouri River and started out on the long journey to the Pacific coast, which they generally reached in the fall. It was a wonderful trip. Every day, the train moved 15 or 20 miles amid new scenes and events. Every night, it camped. New friends were found among the travelers. Children were born along the way. There were weddings and funerals. It was a great traveling city, moving 2,000 miles from the Missouri River to the Pacific Ocean. Father DeSmit tells of the great government wagon trains which he met on the Oregon Trail in 1858. Each train consists of 26 wagons, each wagon drawn by 6 yoke of oxen. The trains made a line 50 miles long. Each wagon is marked with a name, as in the case of ships, and these names served to furnish amusement to the passers-by. Such names as the Constitution, the President, the Great Republic, the King of Bavaria, Louis Napoleon, Dan O'Connell, Old Kentuck, were daubed in great letters on each side of the carriage. On the plains the wagoner assumes the style of captain, being placed in command of his wagon and 12 oxen. The master wagoner is admiral of this little land fleet of 26 captains and 312 oxen. At a distance, the white awnings of the wagons have the effect of a fleet of vessels, with all canvas spread. Wagons used on these trails were of a special build. The freight wagons were very heavy and strong, each carrying about 7,000 pounds of freight. Immigrant wagons were also of a special build, carrying sleeping material, rough furniture, and kitchen outfits. The wagon boxes were shaped like boats with tight bottoms and were sometimes used as boats in crossing rivers. At night, the wagons camped in a circle. Inside this circle, the meals were cooked and meetings of every kind were held. In case of an Indian attack, the circle of wagons became a fort. Men who drove the ox teams were called bull whackers. Each of them carried a whip with a handle about 3 feet long and a lash about 30 feet long. They became very expert in the use of this whip, whirling it over the heads of the oxen with a sharp shift. They produced a sound like the crack of a pistol with the buckskin cracker at the end. From August 1854 until September of 1855, skirmishes began to break out between the Brule Indians and the white men. This left behind a feeling of war between the two. In 1861, when Civil War broke out, the Indians decided that they should fight the white men to get them out of the territory. From 1863 until 1868, there was constant warpath going on in Nebraska. The Cheyenne and Sioux were attacking travelers, ranches, and stage stations by killing and capturing many white people and burning down wagon trains and stage stations. Men from the Civil War were recalled and sent to Fort Kearny to protect the settlers. They were able to push the Indians into Wyoming and Montana. During this time, many battles took place. It was Red Cloud who led a great invasion that caused the United States to send a peace commission. It was the great Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 that gave the Sioux 1 suit of clothes, $10, and rations at the rate of 1 pound of meat and 1 pound of flour for each day. Also, to every Indian who began farming, the United States would issue 1 cow, 1 yoke of oxen, and $20. Along with this, there were many other bonuses. The Sioux agreed to keep the peace and permit the Union Pacific Railroad to be built. The signing of the 1868 treaty ended the Sioux wars for Red Cloud and Spotted Tail. From then on, they tried to secure the rights of their people in council rather than in war. There came more agreements between the chiefs and the government. In 1877, the last of the Oglala and Brule Indians left Nebraska and moved into southern South Dakota. The new Oglala band was then named Pine Ridge, and the new Brule band was named Rosebud. As the Indians were moving out, the pioneers were moving in. The pioneers settled along streams. If there were trees, they would build log houses. For those pioneers that went further west, there were no trees, so they used sod to make their homes, aka dobies. They would cut the tough sod and pile it into walls, covering the top with poles, grass, sod, and clay. Openings were left for windows and the door. There were more of these sod houses than of any other kind. They were very comfortable, being warm in winter and cool in summer. Other pioneers made their houses by digging into a hillside, aka dugouts. They covered the top of the hole with poles, grass, and earth. A space was left open in one end, usually toward the south, which was used for a door. The floors were often nothing more than the bare ground. These early settlers worked very hard to break the land, plant seeds, build houses, and dig wells. The first homes were most often one room, 12 foot by 14 foot, with a fireplace and chimney. Later houses had cook stoves for cooking and heating. Benches and stools were made of logs. The bedsteads and other furniture was often made of logs too. The mattress was a big bed tick stuffed with straw or hay. There were always buffalo robes for part of the bedding. The house was often so crowded that beds were made up all over the floor. A buffalo robe was used for a mattress, and another buffalo robe was used for the fancy quilt on top. All the clothing except a Sunday suit was made for work. Boys went barefoot in the summertime. As a rule, they wore but one garment. In the winter, they wore big, heavy boots and rough woven cloth coats. The girls wore calico dresses, homemade woolen stockings, and sometimes home-knit shawls and jackets. The men wore heavy overalls, often coonskin caps, big buffalo overcoats, and heavy boots that came nearly up to the knee. Everyday food consisted of cornbread, fat pork, and whatever vegetable was in season. Rabbit and prairie chicken were numerous and easy to get almost any day. Deer roamed the prairie too. The buffalo hunters brought in great rolls of dried buffalo, which kept all the year round, and was boiled with potatoes as an appetizing dish. For fun, the children had pet dogs, calves, colts, cats, and chickens. Most boys had a dog that would hunt and drive cattle. A 10-year-old boy usually had a gun. Skating in the winter and swimming in the summer were the regular thing. Girls learned to knit, sew, wash, cook, and drive teams. For indoor games, there were checkers, fox and geese, the string game of cat's cradle, and sometimes the game of authors played with cards. It was a great triumph when a family could afford to get a croquet set. This was sure to attract visitors from far and near. Every frontier farm had a shotgun and generally a rifle to get meat for the table. Besides these, there were axes, spades, hoes, 1 or 2 saws, a big auger and a little auger, pitchforks, 1 or 2 plows, a homemade harrow, a farm wagon, and a few other tools. There was a big iron kettle to heat water for killing and for making homemade soap. Tallow was kept in candles molded for the use during the long winter nights. Almost all the homes had sickness. Fever and ague, called the chills, were most common. People did not know this sickness was the result of mosquito bites. They thought it came from the decay of the sod when it was turned over by the plow. Quinine was the main medicine. In 1871, Nebraska adopted a herd law, stating that everyone had to keep his stock from the crops of other people or pay damages. To keep their stock from entering a crop, they had to herd their stock, hence the law's name, or they could fence off an area for their animals. Anyone finding stock in his crop might take and keep the stock and hold it until the damages were paid. It was from this law that a settler could plant a crop anywhere and could harvest all he could raise. Without it, he could only harvest what he could protect. No law has helped more than this one in the settlement of our state. Although the need of it is no longer felt, The good that it has done abides with us, giving each man the right to reap where he sows. In the 1870s, cattlemen came to the Sandhills area and found it was great for pasturing cattle. The sandy soil makes it challenging to grow crops, but it's suitable for grazing. The area was largely settled due to the 1904 Kincaid Act, which allowed homesteaders to claim 640 acres of land, compared to the 160 acres allowed by the 1862 Homestead Act. Between 1910 and 1917, nearly 9 million acres were claimed under this act. However, many of these ranches broke up shortly afterwards due to regulations. One group of people that attempted to settle in the Sandhills in the early 1900s were the African Americans. Clem Deaver was the first to file a homestead in Cherry County. He quickly talked a group of African Americans into doing the same. They settled northwest of Brownlee, calling their town DeWitte, after an African American business owner. As time passed, they changed the name to Audacious. It was a prosperous town for a while. Soon after World War I, drought and crop failures caused families to mortgage their land, eventually losing it to the banks, like so many other people did at the time. Those who were able to stay found the land was perfect cattle country. Today, the area has around 530,000 beef cattle, which is 1/3 of the state's beef cattle. In fact, Cherry County, located in the Sandhills, is the top cow country in the nation, with nearly 166,000 cows. Ranches in the area are often thousands of acres in size and are operated by the same family for generations. These families pass on their ranching practices, traditions, and heirlooms. One very special family heirloom is the brand placed on the cattle. The brand is what proves who the animal belongs to. Something else the families pass on are stories. A special story I would like to share comes from a family that settled in the area in the late 1800s. I'm going to read the story as it was written in the book, Nebraska, Old and New. The Great Sandhills section of western Nebraska is in the shape of an open fan. The handle of the fan is in Hayes and Dundee counties, near the southwest corner of the state. The broad wings of the fan extend into parts of Cherry, Sheridan, Holt, Rock, Antelope, and Pierce counties, reaching the northern border of the state. The center of this Sandhills fan is in the southern Cherry and Thomas counties. Here extend for many miles in every direction great billows of sandy soil. Until closely studied, all the landscapes look alike. Each sandhill seems like each other sandhill, and the little vales which lie between are all sisters of the same age. The sand drifts and slides about with each gust of wind. There are no great landmarks to serve as guides. If one climbs to the top of the highest hill in sight, everywhere is a confused medley of hills and hollows, extending as far as the eye can see. It looks like an ocean tossed by a great storm whose waves have suddenly changed to sand. In early years of exploration and settlement, the Sandhills were regarded as a dangerous region. Many stories told of hunters and explorers who were lost among these hills. In more than one place, human skeletons have been found, telling their silent story of a losing struggle with hunger and thirst. One of the most thrilling incidences of frontier days occurred in the Sandhills of Thomas County in 1891. In March of that year, a German family named Hamann settled near Thetford. There were 9 or 10 children in the family. The eldest girl, Hannah, went to work for Mr. Gilson, a neighbor who lived about 1.5 miles away. Her custom was to come home on Sunday and spend a happy day with her brothers and sisters. One Sunday in May, she was not able to come home as usual because Mr. Gilson was away, and Mrs. Gilson wished Hannah to stay with her for company. This made the other children unhappy, and Tilly and Retta coaxed their mother to let them go over to the Gilson home to visit their sister. Tilly was 8 years old and Retta was only 4. After dinner, Mrs. Hammond let them go, telling them to only stay for an hour and then come straight home. They reached Mr. Gilson safely and at about 4 o'clock started hand in hand to return home. At this season of the year, the Sandhills are beautiful with grasses and wildflowers. The two children left their path and ran eagerly to gather those which they saw nearby. But they saw still others, more beautiful, a little further off. So they laughed and ran on to gather them, until the path was lost, and the great sea of sandhills stretched before them, wave upon wave. Lost upon this sea, they wandered on and on. Night came and brought no children to the Hammond home. At daybreak the next morning, the neighbors were searching the hills. Word had been sent to Thetford, and from there to the surrounding country. Although it was the busy season of the year, men left their fields and herds and tramped or rode over the hills and hollows, looking everywhere for the two little girls. Monday afternoon, just before sundown, they found their trail. That night, Mr. Stacy with a party of searchers camped on the trail. As soon as it was light, they followed the children's tracks, sometimes rapidly, often more slowly and not infrequent upon their hands and knees. The story of the children's wanderings and weariness was written in the prints made on the sand and grass along the way. Here Tilly had carried Retta. Here they had walked side by side. Here they had rested. Here they were up again and pushing bravely on. Tuesday night the searchers camped again by the side of the trail. They did not know until too late that they and the children had been only a little distance apart that night. Wednesday morning they found where Tilly and Retta had passed the night lying close by each other on the sand. Here the trail grew hard to follow, and much time was lost. Meanwhile, the women at Thetford were helping in their homes, preparing food and coffee, which they sent to the men on the trail. The searchers found the work anxious and nerve-wracking. At times, the little footprints were plain and clear, and they hastened to overtake the children. A little farther on, the light sand had sifted across and left no trace to follow. The poor mother could not join the search, for she had 2 children younger than Retta, one a baby. She waited at home from hour to hour for news of her lost children. While the searchers followed, the 2 children wandered on, traveling when awake almost constantly. If they had only waited, they would soon have been found. But their minds were filled with the thought of home, while their feet carried them even farther away with each wary step. On Wednesday morning, Tilly told Retta to wait at the foot of a big hill while she went to the top to see if there was a house in sight. When she reached the top, she seems to have seen a larger hill, a common impression as one looks out over that country, and went on to get the wider view from that. Retta thought that she would meet her sister more quickly by going around the hill, and so started on. Thus they were separated, never to meet again. At about noon of this day, the searching party, which included Mr. Hammond, Mr. Stacy, Mr. Maceberg, and Dr. Edmonds, found Retta carrying one little shoe with its sole worn through, while the other had been dropped on the trail. Both of the girls had worn new shoes when they left home that Sunday. Very tenderly the little girl was cared for by the doctor and the others. She had wandered so long without food or water that her mind was affected for many days. She said that they had saw a prairie fire and went to it in hope of finding someone, but no one was there. The search for Tilly went on. From Dunning, 30 miles east of Thetford, a party of searchers started on Wednesday, the day on which Retta was found. They formed a long line across the hills to intercept her, for the children had wandered east. On Sunday, May 17th, the Dunning party found the lost girl. She had taken off her apron and spread it over some rose bushes, and had laid herself on the sand beneath. There she had died. Her body was placed on a handcar and taken to Thetford. Her parents did not recognize her except by her clothing. She was wasted to skin and bones, and her fair, tender flesh was burned black by exposure. All the neighborhood came to her funeral and wept with her family. That country is settled now, and fences stretch everywhere across the Sandhills. One has only to follow a fence, and he will reach a ranch or a road. Retta grew into womanhood and had a little daughter of her own. She lived at Broken Bow and often visited the old home. You may be sure that the early settlers did not fail to recall with deep feeling the days when they followed a fading trail, while far off ahead of them toiled the figure of a brave little girl, carrying her younger sister in her arms to ease her weariness as they struggled on in search of home. For my family, just about 20 miles north of the Hammond settlement, they made their home. As the years passed by, many cool historical events and objects began to be uncovered. One historical observation that was made was the unique land formation of this area down by the river. As one studies this area, you can begin to envision a homestead out of sod. How there could have been sod fences built in a rectangular shape with a sod building inside of the rectangle. You can make out where there were openings in the fence to allow for the coming and going of people and animals. Here is a photo of what a sod homestead looked like in the early days of settling this area. This picture shows another perspective of the possible sod homestead that was on my family's land. When you gaze upon this unique landform during the fall, from a hill that's not too far away, this very intriguing observation can be made. The red rectangle indicates where the homestead was constructed. The red you see is little bluestem, a native grass to our area. It's probably growing predominantly in this rectangle due to the highly fertilized land from the animals that once inhabited the homestead. Another discovery that my family made was of the Fort Kearny and Oglala trails crossing the land. To commemorate this crossing, a sign was put into place. Just like the Sandhills, history is in constant change. What kind of history are we leaving for others to discover?